Hey guys, welcome back. In this session, we will be learning about the Spring Boot. What is Spring Boot? What is Spring Boot? Spring Boot is Spring Boot. It's a framework which is built on top of the Spring framework. So Spring Boot it's kind of a framework which is built on top of the Spring framework. Spring Boot helps you to develop applications quickly. It could be a standalone applications. Okay, so you can develop standalone applications. You can develop standalone applications. You can develop production ready applications. Production ready applications. Okay, you can develop any sort of application. Server side applications also you can develop. You can develop any sort of application using Spring Boot. If you use Spring Boot, you'll be providing the minimal configuration. You'll be providing the minimal configuration. And Spring Boot provide built-in tools and libraries which simplifies the setup of our development process. Okay, Spring Boot will be providing some built-in tools, built-in tools which helps us to set up and develop the applications rapidly, quickly. Okay, so what are the build tools? It is what are the building tools the Spring is giving? The building tools, the Spring inbuilt tools, the Spring is giving. One is embedded Tomcat. In Spring Boot, in normal Spring, if you want to run any Spring based applications, you have to run on server. You have to run on server, and that server should be you're adding additionally to your in your system. But when you're using Spring Boot, automatically the Tomcat will be embedded. I'll show you when we are creating a first Spring Boot application. I'll show you how it is integrated into the Spring Boot application. Okay. And we have tools like DevTools. So normally, if you use Spring application, if you are developing a Spring based application, if you are doing any changes in your code, okay, even small change also, you have to restart your Tomcat server and you have to, you know, see the changes, latest changes. Okay. So now, for example, I have like, I'm working on a Spring Boot application. Let's say, for example, I have an employee class. In my employee class, I have added ID and name. These are the two attributes I have added. And I ran my application. Okay. So now the Tomcat server only knows the attributes of employee ID and name. So in between, let's say if the Tomcat server is running, now I want to add one more variable, let's say a salary. Salary. Okay. So as you have added a salary, the Tomcat server will not read this one. It will read only this data only. It will not capture this one. Okay. So in order to solve this problem, in order to capture this salary as well, what we have to do? We have to restart the Tomcat server, and the Tomcat server now it will read the latest changes as well, and it will give whenever we need it. For example, if I call get salary, at that time it will give get salary. Okay, fine. So what I'm trying to say is that if you are using Spring Boot, plain Spring, you have to, like, if you are doing a changes on your Spring based applications, every time you have to see the latest changes which you have done. Okay, so you have to restart your Tomcat again and again. When it comes to the Spring Boot, you have a DevTools. So what DevTools it will do is it will automatically reload the code. Okay, so what exactly it will do is, see, normally in Spring Boot application, Tomcat, what it will do is, it will be, if you want to see the changes, latest changes, the Tomcat needs to be restarted, and the dependencies should be, reloaded again. Now, when it comes to the DevTools, you don't need to restart your Tomcat. Okay, you don't need to restart the Tomcat. And when you are, the when you added new changes, when you added new changes in your Spring Boot application, okay, so the DevTools will automatically capture all those things. For example, let's say I have ID, name, and salary. Let's say, for example, I want to add the employee, employee um, account number, something like this. I added some new attribute to my employee class. Now, when it comes to the Spring Boot, you have added a new property, right? So what Spring Boot will do is it will read that. It will read that property, and it will not restart the Tomcat server. What it will do is it will just reload the changes. It will just update to the Tomcat that, so okay, this is the particular property is added to your class, something like that. Okay, it will not restart the Tomcat server. It will just update to the Tomcat server and new property is added. Okay, so that is a one to one. The other one is we have auto configuration. Auto configuration. See, if you have observed, if you have gone through my Spring, XML based and annotation based lectures, you might have seen like we used to configure the beans in our XML configuration.xml file and in our Java, in our configuration class itself. Why? If we want to use the beans in our application in plain old Spring, what we used to do, we have to configure the bean definition in the config.xml file or in the configuration class. So over here, you don't need to do anything. You just have to use a simple annotation. You just have to use a simple annotation called add component. We will be learning this annotation. Okay. So we'll be learning this annotation in coming days. You'll be writing add component annotation on your top of your class. For example, here we have an employee. Okay, employee is a class. In that employee class, we have the attributes called the ID, name, salary, all these things we have. Okay, you know, right, how to define the properties: private ID name, private ID salary, private ID, private employee account number, all these things you have to write it. So for time being, I'm not writing all those things. Okay, I'll write a simple example. I'll show it to you. Okay, so these are the some of the tools, building tools they have given actually, and there is a one more tool actually. The starter, a Spring Boot is providing the starter projects. Starter projects to Spring Boot. See, this is the main advantage. This is the starter project and the auto configuration and dev tools, the m.tomcat. These are the tools which is provided by the Spring community to rapidly develop, fastly develop the Spring Boot applications. So here, starter projects. Normally, if you see a Spring application, if you are working with any Spring based applications, you have to provide the dependencies. See, for example, let's say you are developing a normal Spring based application. Okay, now you are using the Spring version as a 5. Spring version as a 5. Okay. The Spring version 5, we need to choose the compatible version of Java also. If the Java is not compatible with the Spring 5, it will not work. It will not work. Okay. So this is kind of a headache for a developer. Every time developer needs to concentrate on the compatibility. Developer needs to concentrate on three things. One is that adding the dependency and checking the compatibility with uh, the Java version. Okay. So all these things should be handled by the developer only. It's kind of like it's kind of a headache we were having in those days, almost like 6 or 7 years back. So we used to have this one. Okay, every time when you add a new dependency, you have to check the compatibility with the Java. If it is compatible, then only you can use it. Otherwise, you cannot use it. If you are using, like for example, if you are using Java 17 and if you are using the Spring version as 4 or 3, it will not work. If you are using Java 17, minimum 5 plus should be there or 6 should be there. Spring version. Okay, then only the the Spring application will start running it. In order to overcome this problem, so the Spring community has given the starter projects. And over here, I forgot to tell one more thing. See, if you are in Spring, if you're working with web-based applications, you have to add Spring Core dependencies, web dependencies, and you have to add, if you're working with the database, you have to add a database dependencies as well. Okay, which is kind of it's kind of a headache for a developer, which we faced it, in our olden days. So now here, the Spring Boot, as a Spring Boot came up with the starter projects. So if you, for example, if you want to start working with, if you want to work with the web-based applications, we have a starter project called Spring Boot Starter Web. So this is the dependency we can use it to work with the web-based application. If you want to work with REST-based application, we have a starter called REST. Spring Boot Starter REST. If you want to work with Hibernate, you have a dependency called Spring Boot Starter Hibernate. If you want to work with JPA, you have a Spring Boot Starter JPA, etc. etc. In this Spring Boot Starter Web, okay, in this Spring Boot Starter Web, I'll show you when I write a simple, when I design a simple application, when I create a simple application, I'll show you what exactly, how many dependencies it will be internally added. Okay, so when you are developing a web-based applications, what are the dependencies required by a normal Java application, normal Spring Boot application? All those dependencies will be given by the starter project. Okay, so we will be having a parent version for our Spring Boot. So based on this parent version, the related dependencies will be downloaded. I'll show you that one as well. So as of just keep in mind, like we have a starter projects for us in order to work with the Spring Boot applications. If you want to work with web, you have a Spring Boot starter web. If you want to work with REST, you have a Spring Boot starter REST. If you want to work with any other AWS, or we have a starter projects as well. If you want to work with the Spring Security, we have a starter project as well. Okay. Yeah. Fine. Now let's discuss the prerequisites to create a Spring Boot application. Prerequisites, or we can say that the software is required to develop a Spring Boot applications. Software required to develop a Spring Boot application. First, of course, Java. Okay, here we will be using Java 17. Here we are using Java 17. Do not afraid. We are not using the features of Java 17. We are just using the features of Java 8 only. Okay. So Java 17 will support Java 8 also. The second software we are using is Maven. Okay. So Maven is a build tool. Okay. So which is used to structure your project and which is used to download the dependencies as well. So there is a Maven repository. So from there we will be downloading the starter projects. Okay. And we need the most important thing is we need Eclipse or IntelliJ IDEA. We need Eclipse or IntelliJ IDEA and Postman and Postman. So these are the some of the softwares we are required to develop or to work only with the Spring Core application, Spring Boot core based application. Spring Boot. If you go anywhere, so these are the things everyone will be using it. Spring Boot core application. Okay. In Spring, we have many, you know, categories actually. Spring Core, which is nothing but it's a plain kind of a core based, like, kind of core based applications we will be working with. There will be kind of web based applications. There will be REST based applications. Okay. There'll be uh, database applications. Okay. So we have wide variety of it and we will be using it. Okay. And so these are the softwares which is required to develop the Spring core based applications. So when you are when later discussing the Spring core, we will be integrating Spring data JPA, or we will be we want to we will be introducing that how we are going to store the data in a database. Okay. For this, I'll recommend you to download the SQL server or SQL developer. So this is you need it. And if you need SQL ARG also you need SQL ARG also you need. And hmm, that's it I think. Yeah, these are the some softwares you are required actually. Okay. So now let's go and run the Spring Boot application in the next lesson. Okay, in the next lecture. Okay. So until then, thank you.